in French and Spanish. Hope you were able to get your devices at the entrance. Unfortunately, after 45 minutes, the interpreters will need a bit time to rest, and don't worry, it will resume after 15 minutes. Our colleagues brought us some local snacks. Please help yourself. We have some nuts from Brazil, Amazon chocolates, and local berries or dagway in the Philippines, and biscuits that our colleagues will be distributing around. Also, a gentle reminder to our speakers and panelists to please keep to the time. We have colleagues who will be kind enough to flash a card to remind us of the remaining time. And apologies in advance if I interrupt you. The session this afternoon is divided into 3 rounds. With these 3 rounds, we want to show the barriers, but also the solutions of working models with bilateral and multilateral climate finance, reaching grassroots gender-just climate action. It will clearly show that we don't want to hear anymore, it is too complicated, or we don't know how to do about it. We are just speaking today about actionable solutions for gender-just climate finance and policy. Unfortunately, we do not have time for Q&A, but feel free to go to the panelists and approach them directly, especially after this event, or send us any questions through our social media handles. Okay, so let's start this conversation with a keynote from Zonia Zacarias. Zonia Zacarias, Maya Kiche, has been working with women's organizations, indigenous peoples, and local communities in the recognition and visibility of individual and collective rights in the management of biodiversity and climate change. She is a member of the Council of Indigenous Women and Biodiversity. Zonia will speak in Spanish, so may I ask you, so please put your headphones and go to the Spanish channel. Zonia, please, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Buenas tardes, como ya lo han indicado, soy Zonia Zacarias del Consejo de Mujeres Indígenas y Biodiversidad. Ay,
just one moment.
Disculpen.
Okay, go ahead, Zonia.
Ok, tal vez más cerca. Bueno, como ya lo dijo el compañero, mi nombre es Zonia Zacarias, yo soy parte del Consejo de Mujeres Indígenas y Biodiversidad de Guatemala. Desde hace 14 años venimos trabajando en la búsqueda del ejercicio pleno de los derechos individuales y colectivos de las mujeres indígenas a nivel local, nacional e internacional. En 2 grandes temáticas que es biodiversidad y cambio climático. Así también, en esta oportunidad quiero hacer mención del Fondo Centroamericano de Mujeres Indígenas y la Alianza Gaga, por creer en las acciones que desarrollamos con organizaciones de mujeres mayas, chincas y garífonas y mestizos de Guatemala. Bueno, en ese sentido, entendemos que cada día en los territorios las mujeres, principalmente mujeres indígenas, contribuimos con nuestros conocimientos y prácticas al desarrollo de la familia y la comunidad. Y esto no hace solamente referencia a las actividades asignadas por roles de género en el hogar, sino a la conservación de los idiomas, también aportamos a la conservación de los sistemas propios de alimentación, así también, por ejemplo, a nuestra vestimenta, la vestimenta que el día de hoy cargo, es hecha con manos de mujeres, con conocimientos indígenas como tal. Entonces, ahí la contribución de las mujeres también. Contribuimos a la conservación de las semillas nativas como tal, también a la conservación de plantas medicinales y comestibles como tal. También en este recorrido histórico que hemos tenido los pueblos indígenas y obviamente las mujeres, hemos entendido que estas contribuciones muchas veces no son invisibilizadas, mejor dicho, es decir, estas contribuciones son invisibilizadas, no se reconoce estas contribuciones que día a día las mujeres hacemos. A pesar de todos estos aportes también a nivel de nuestro país, a nivel de la región también, consideramos que hay una desigualdad por cuestiones de género como tal. Y también miramos grandes desigualdades en el aspecto económico, social, político y ambiental para las mujeres como tal. Esto se ha ido vinculando también que en los territorios se han ido transformando. Los territorios a nivel de las comunidades se han ido transformando por una serie de actividades de impacto. Bueno, yo creo que hay impactos que ha dejado la palma aceitera, las hidroeléctricas, la minería, entre otros. Y estas actividades han ido transformando esos territorios, ha ido transformando el tejido social, pero también han afectado los ecosistemas naturales como tal. ¿Y por qué es importante hacer mención esto? Porque muchas de las comunidades y obviamente las mujeres tienen una dependencia a esos ecosistemas naturales como tal, que el día de hoy están siendo afectados como tal. Nosotras entendemos que hay una disputa de los recursos a nivel del territorio y esto se vincula también a los efectos del cambio climático que se están sintiendo y no es de ahora. O sea, las comunidades, los pueblos indígenas, no estamos hablando ahora del cambio climático, de los impactos. Esto desde nuestros ancestros que tienen una lectura con la naturaleza ya lo han venido diciendo. Para nosotros los pueblos indígenas no es que hasta ahora se miran esos cambios en el clima, o sea, los cambios en el clima han sido cuestiones históricas como tal. La diferencia es que hoy los impactos son más recurrentes a nivel del territorio. Y bueno, en este caso también entendemos que las mujeres son las que están sufriendo o están siendo impactadas con todas las cuestiones de cambio climático, pero también lo que observamos es que las mujeres indígenas en este contexto no están participando en las políticas o en las acciones de mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático como tal. Es decir, que los proyectos que nosotras observamos en el territorio siguen siendo que las mujeres son vistas como beneficiarias. O sea, las mujeres son beneficiarias de un programa de seguridad alimentaria, un programa de emprendimiento económico y bueno, pero realmente las mujeres somos sujetas de derechos, tenemos también la capacidad de proponer acciones y soluciones al clima, como ya lo he mencionado, hacemos contribuciones cada día. Y en ese sentido, consideramos que hay que cambiar la forma también de hacer los proyectos a nivel de los territorios, ¿sí? Muchas veces consideramos que las mujeres, como ya lo decía, somos beneficiarias, pero no, tienen que vernos como mujeres que tenemos conocimiento, tenemos capacidad para implementación de proyectos también, es decir, que es necesario que las agendas internacionales de financiación también miren las aspiraciones de las mujeres también desde su propio contexto como tal. Y en ese sentido, en todo este devenir de la financiación climática también nos hemos dado cuenta de que la apuesta es continuar con instituciones o instituciones que de alguna manera se han vuelto intermediarias, es decir, que el financiamiento no va directo hacia las organizaciones de mujeres. ¿Por qué? Porque a las mujeres se le considera que no tienen conocimiento, no tienen capacidad y por lo tanto es necesario que una ONG intermediaria tenga que venir y administrar los fondos, y eso no es así. Y en este caso no estoy diciendo que las organizaciones intermediarias no sean importantes, son importantes, porque ya han generado una estructura financiera, administrativa como tal. Pero si queremos de alguna manera también que las mujeres participen en esas soluciones del clima, como ya lo han venido haciendo, es necesario también que la financiación del clima, los entes internacionales, los entes nacionales también tienen que generar esas capacidades porque hay a nivel de las organizaciones de mujeres indígenas como tal. Y bueno, creo que este side event, este espacio que hoy nos une aquí, creo que no vamos a encontrar las soluciones, pero sí en alguna medida podemos decir que tenemos que seguir dialogando para definir una estructura donde la financiación llegue a las comunidades. Y como les digo, nosotras desde nuestra organización hemos ido construyendo esas capacidades, pocas, pero vamos avanzando y donde nosotras mismas como mujeres creemos que tenemos el conocimiento, tenemos la capacidad y no es porque ahora lo que venimos a decir así, sino que desde años atrás tenemos conocimiento, nuestros ancestros han tenido conocimiento. Lo que pasa es que al final la visión racista y discriminadora también de los estados monoculturales no ha dejado ver esto. Pero la cuestión es que ahí siempre hemos estado en el territorio, conocemos y obviamente el punto medular aquí es que se reconozcan esos esfuerzos en esas acciones de adaptación y mitigación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Zonia, for that very inspiring message. Women indeed have the capacity to implement, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of funds directly channeled to grassroots women and continuing the dialogue. Now let me hand over to the floor to Andrew for his keynote. Andrew Hurst is the Executive Director of Climate Finance at Global Affairs Canada. Thanks so much for being here and to talk about how Canada is integrating gender equality in climate finance. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you to Gaga and its member organizations for inviting me to participate in this event today. I think it's fairly obvious to everybody why this is a critical moment to talk about gender-just climate transitions, and we're very pleased to be able to support Gaga in its efforts to engage with and involve women's organizations directly in the work on around climate action. And as we've very eloquently heard, this is not just because women and girls and other vulnerable communities are the least responsible for the situation that we're in right now with the climate, but also most vulnerable to the kinds of impacts we're seeing with increased intensity and frequency. At the same time, though, it's also about ensuring we can empower women and girls and other communities to be agents of change. We know that they are often closest to the problem and have innovative solutions. So if we're not involving them in the decision making or in the thinking and planning, then we're missing out on some of those critical solutions. And whatever we do come up with certainly won't have an important element of justice within it. So Canada strongly believes more generally that putting gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity at the heart of our international assistance is actually the most effective way to build a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world. Under our feminist international assistance policy, we prioritize investments and partnerships and advocacy efforts that have the greatest potential to close gender gaps, eliminate barriers to gender equality, and help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And our climate finance commitment when it was announced in 2021, very much incorporates the ethos of the Feminist International Assistance policy into its design. This includes a policy target of having 80% of the projects that we fund with our climate finance integrate gender equality into their design. And as of now, we've actually, of all the projects that are currently being funded, 91% of them actually integrate gender equality to a significant degree. This means that our climate finance program is incentivizing or seeks to incentivize transformational actions towards more gender and socially inclusive participation in adaptation and mitigation actions, including removing barriers to achieving climate justice. For example, we aim to work with partners that advocate for the rights of women and girls and other marginalized groups, including women's rights and Indigenous organizations. So in addition to providing grants and contributions that advance both climate and gender equality, we've also tried to find new, innovative ways to advance this priority. Through our work, we advocate for the integration of gender-responsive approaches and women's greater access to climate finance in diverse fora. For example, as one of our climate finance projects with the Inter-American Development Bank, we're using performance-based incentives to advance gender equality with the private sector. The bank provides lower interest rates to clients who meet agreed-upon targets for gender equality outcomes. And as a result, in one instance, a company in Argentina has increased the number of its female workers by 25% in 1 year based on this incentive. And we're seeing many other instances where this is working. And this is particularly critical in some of the sectors associated with climate action, which have historically very low participation rates of women in their labor force. Other actions include providing grants alongside principal contributions to incentivize gender equality outcomes. For example, $10 million out of our $60 million contribution to the renewable energy facility at the World Bank was provided in grants and was dedicated to the improvement of energy access for women and girls and the provision of training and employment opportunities for women in sustainable energy sectors, where, as I mentioned, women were traditionally underrepresented. We're also active in other initiatives and organizations that focus on knowledge sharing and learning. We're a member of the Ensure Resilience Global Partnerships High-Level Consultative Group and co-chair its Gender Working Group. And in that course of doing so, we support IGP's mission to incorporate gender equality in climate and disaster risk insurance and finance solutions. So we were very pleased to be able to announce our support to Gaga in September, which, as you all know, aims to push back against the challenges facing women when it comes to climate action by targeting areas often overlooked in climate discourse, which is the gender-specific impacts of climate change. And this was, our contribution was announced last September by our Prime Minister on the margins of the UN General Assembly. This is the first project under our climate finance program that's providing support to grassroots organizations, women's rights organizations, and others from Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America, and the Pacific, working at the nexus of climate, gender, and environmental justice. And of course, this is just one of a number of things we're doing. Many of you are probably aware of the Equality Fund, which we've stood up, which is also supporting women's rights organizations, and the Women's Voice and Leadership Program, which is working directly with women's rights organizations in a number of countries around the world. So I look forward to hearing discussions today and learning more about the recommendations to improve access to climate finance for grassroots organizations and what works best and what other lessons are being learned. I do apologize, I need to leave at quarter two, but if anybody does want to follow up with me afterwards, I'd be happy to, through the organizers, connect with you later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing the Global Affairs Canada's important contribution for partnering and supporting Gaga in the Women Leading Climate Action Program. It is indeed an important step in the right direction for climate action at the grassroots level to be gender and socially just. We hope you continue to collaborate and channel these resources more to this concrete and scalable program. Now, let's go to the first round, or talking about existing models to fund local actors. For this round, we will talk about how the climate finance localization agenda requires actors on the ground. And we will hear from Amanda Costa and Juliana Tinoco about models that currently exist to make this challenge possible and what the outcomes are of these models. Let me introduce Amanda and Juliana. Amanda Costa is a Brazilian climate activist, young advisor to the UN Global Compact, founder of the Sustainable Periphery Institute, and host of #TemClima Paraíso, or Is There Climate for This, a program about the climate crisis at Alma Preta Journalism. Juliana Tinoco holds the position of Executive Coordinator at the Alianza Socioambiental Fondos del Sur, or Socio-Environmental Funds from the Global South, a pioneering joint initiative of funds working to strengthen grassroots communities in the Global South. Amanda and Juliana, you have 5 minutes each. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. In Portuguese, we say bom dia. Would you like to try? Bom dia. Yes. I'd like to start my speech with a sentence from Sônia Guajajara. She's one of Brazilian minister, and she works with indigenous people. Sônia says, esse não é o ano mais quente da história. Esse será o ano mais fresco das próximas décadas. In English, it means, this is not the hottest year in history. This will be the coolest year in the coming decades. Now close your eyes and think in all the climate issues that we already have in your communities. The floods, the heat, deforestation, the rain. This will get worse and worse and worse. My name is Amanda Costa. I am a climate activist. I'm the CEO of Perifa Sustentável Institute. I'm a United Nations Youth Ambassador, and I'm here in this COP representing the climate movement. Here in my shirt says, Vozes Negras pelo Clima, Black Voices for the Climate. In Perifa Sustentável, we want to democratize the climate agenda in local communities, slums, favelas, because these are the communities that are suffering the worst impact by the climate crisis. We work with edu-communication, climate advocacy, and local actions. And what is the importance of local actions? Everybody always says, oh, we need to think globally and act locally. But is the money coming to the youth, to the grassroots groups, to the favelas? I'm here because I was supported by Fundo Casa Socioambiental. Perifa Sustentável Institute received a small grant to develop Clima de Quebrada. It's our program to make capacitating building sessions in public schools. We are working with climate capacitation, environmental racism, youth protagonism, local knowledge, and community intervention. And it's so powerful when I see people from my community, people from Brasilândia, the local that I was born, I was raised, and I still live, come to me and say, Amanda, I noticed that I am suffering the environmental racism. Raise your hand if you already listened about this term, environmental racism. I want to see. Just a few people. And it's important to understand that this environmental racism is part of a structural system. So, what do you need? What is important to be here? I have 3 requests for you. First, we need to decrease bureaucracy. Sometimes it's very hard to apply for projects because we don't understand sometimes the English. Like indigenous community, black communities. In Brazil, just 1% of our population speak English. The second point, we need to make capacity programs. It's not just give the money and everything will happen. No, it's important to be with us, to work with us, and to help us to develop our programs. And the third, we need to increase climate finance to local projects. It's very beautiful to be here, to speak with us, but I don't want to leave this room without ways to make the money come to the grassroots, simple ways. Because when the money comes to the hands of youth, of indigenous people, of black communities, we make transformations. And I don't want to just participate in COPs, talk, and don't see the transformation coming. So now I want to make a question for you. What are you going to do with this? This will be another COP, another meeting, another event, or this will be another step to make the transformation happen, to increase the money to local communities, to decrease bureaucracy, and to make this speech be not just another speech, but the transformation action to make you transform your communities. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'll be half echoing what my colleague Amanda just said, and thank you very much, Amanda, for all the inspiration. I'm also Brazilian. My name is Juliana. Well, I want to start by remembering that the climate crisis that we face is the result of historical injustice, the nature of colonial development, and the extractive nature of capitalism. The field of climate justice, environmental justice, and what many countries in the Global South also call social environmentalism takes a systems perspective on the climate crisis and focus on its root causes. The most affected have the fewest resources available to mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis, and the other side of this conversation is that those closest to the problem are the closest to the solution. Directed impacted communities are generating transformative, innovative solutions born out of their lived experience and rooted in ancestral knowledges and practices. And those solutions are making impact locally, like mentioned here, regionally, and also globally. And they are deeply under-resourced and underappreciated. I say all this because how we define a problem dictates how we address it. And we need to foster the solutions that address the systemic roots of the problems, and we can only achieve this if we co-create the solutions with the people on the ground. Yet, speaking about philanthropic money, last data from ClimateWorks shows that less than 2% of philanthropic money goes to climate change mitigation, and of that, only a very small percentage supported justice and equity-oriented efforts. Additionally, finance for climate is undermined by a fixation on only technical solutions, market-based solutions, as well as a lot of standard operation practices mentioned here already, such as burdensome application processes, bureaucracy, unequal access by groups that are not part of the funders' socioeconomic networks, language barrier, and lots of implicit biases. Yet, there is a growing body of evidence that local strategies contribute to scale and efficiencies by connecting local, national, and global change in ways that are often overlooked. Moving from local to global, what scale means is that by building power to organize, operationalize, and strategize in one place, and by means of collaboration, we get to learn and grow from each other and build solutions that are going to cross across and connect places. And this is the nature of the social environmental funds of the Global South Alliance, which I here represent today. An alliance built by and from local activist funds, deeply rooted in the countries and regions where they operate, which exist to fund the underfunded communities, the communities they were born to serve. The alliance, which was formally launched 2 years ago, and only this year received its first structural support, it's comprised of 13 funds with current operation in almost 30 countries of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, with a combined regranting history which sums over $37 million. Each of these 13 funds is a nationally or regionally based funding structure operating in local languages and cultures, making grants in local currencies and offering a safe space for community to develop skills that will open doors to more support. The mission of the Alliance is to form a body of collaboration between those funding actors, creating collaborative avenues for scaling their grant-making capacity, working to support in evidence building and strategic communication in order to influence and build capacity within the funding ecosystem. And we also see and celebrate that there is a growing number of funders that are deeply interested in reorienting their climate strategies, acknowledging that their business as usual not only has proven to be inefficient, but had contributed to exacerbate inequalities, and with that, deepening the crisis they were hoping to address in the first place. Local funds which were created and are operated by actors of the Global South and they're rooted with their communities have the power and the means not only to serve their grant-making mission, but also to offer expertise to help support other actors in the field in their learning curve towards applying a climate justice and also a gender justice by means of that in their work. I have immense pleasure today to be along the peers of Casa Fund, which is the founding member, one of the founding members of the Alliance, a Brazilian-based local fund with almost 20 years of operation, almost 3,000 supported projects along the way that has a great, immense portfolio of supported projects by indigenous communities, and within its alliance with Gaga has been increasing its portfolio of support to women defenders in Brazil, and which has supported to create local funds across South America and Africa. And also to announce that our most recent member is the Pastor Rice Fund, which forms part of the NTFP-EP organization. So I am among my colleagues and supported projects. So I invite you all to learn more about the Alliance. We have brought some folders to explain more about the work and build connections with us and with our members in order to advance in this knowledge exchange and to co-create the new approaches to climate finance that have the climate justice and the gender justice lens towards it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Juliana, for reminding us to co-create funding with climate and gender just lens, and to remove the bureaucracy and engaging youth to manage and implement projects, also to build and influence funding. So thank you for that. We have here with us Renee Van Hel, Director of Inclusive Green Growth, Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to tell us about how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Netherlands is shifting climate finance to gender-just climate solutions. Renee, you have 5 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. And first I want to say it's really wonderful to be here in this panel, because we started this journey, as Zonia called it, a while ago. And it's really super important that these important voices are heard. And because this is an alliance about fighting for sustainability and for an inclusive development, but it's also for fighting against injustice and ignorance and prejudices. And that's what we're doing here, and that's what really enthuses me. Personally, I was involved in this cause even already at the Earth Summit, so you can probably understand how impatient I feel. And at the same time, I also see positive things happening, but it's not all positive, because yes, what are we doing at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? We have a huge portfolio of ODA, or huge, we still think it's quite good, but it's pretty good. So for example, in my 800 million euro annual portfolio, the two cross-cutting things are always climate and gender. So we're very strong on that. And also by listening very carefully, for example, as what Zonia said about, if you can read nature like indigenous people can, what does that mean? And what does that mean for your policy making? Or for example, what the two of you both said, what does it actually mean that you want to provide climate finance? And how does it trickle down? Well, I'm not so proud about how it trickles down in my ministry. It's quite often really stuck at a much higher level, and it's not reaching the grassroots. It's not really encouraging and empowering a locally led development. So those are really things that we need to work on. But what is really good is, I think, and that was also exemplified, for example, at something so technocratic as the World Bank annual meeting last 2 months ago in Marrakesh, is that there now is sort of a trinity developing, in the sense like, if you really want to have development and it should be durable and sustainable, then you need to work at the same time at avoiding biodiversity loss, and you need to work, you need to ensure that there is no climate change. So this idea of development, biodiversity, climate, I think is super important, and it is something that slowly there's a consensus growing. And the other thing I think is really this locally led, but this is something that we really need to implement much better. What you said about financing, well heard, well understood, bring it back to The Hague. What I also would like to point out is that probably when we started this journey, what was not so clear is that actually we're going to change. We're going into these green transitions. But what you also see happening is that there's a huge amount of vested interest investing hundreds of millions to derail our course. And I really like to underline it. We're really up to something. and it influences how the political discourse is, and if you call it the hybrid threat or whatever you want to call it, but there's a lot of misinformation, and also trying to corner what we're standing for as something odd or obscure, and that is something that I see in many countries, and my own country not excluded. So that is also something that we need to be aware of. We need to be very clear about what we want to achieve. At the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with a social market economy, provided that the government governs and also decides who gets what. And a government that thinks about inequality and equality, and also thinks about justice, but also thinks about progress. So a government also should really clearly think about what kind of developments do you want to promote, and what kind of developments are almost autonomous. And what you see with a lot of companies is that they, on the one hand, earn a lot of money still with the fossil stuff, and on the other hand, they're also working towards a green transition. And that's why we're here. We really want to go much faster on this green transition, because that is what is needed. And if it needs to be just and inclusive, then the gender element is an imperative to do so. So wrapping up, thank you for enthusing me. As I said, I've been working on this issue for quite a while. Super impatient. I have a feeling that we're going into the right direction, but there's a lot of people who want us to go into the wrong direction. So please be also aware of that. We're not living in a naive world, and what we're doing is also not naive. It's necessary. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Renee, for also emphasizing that we are indeed going to the right direction in terms of gender just climate finance and policies. So thank you so much to all our panelists for this first round. May I invite you all to join our audience in front and request our second round of speakers, Maria, Tiffany, Nida, and Amy, here in the panel for our second and third round of discussion. Now, while they are settling down, we go to the second round where we will discuss gender decision-making, gender-just decision-making, where we will learn from Maria and Tiffany more about the current obstacles women in Tanzania face to meaningfully engage in climate finance decision-making processes. So may I introduce Maria and Tiffany. Maria Matui represents Women Action Towards Economic Development, or WATED, and has set up the Gender and Climate Coalition, GCCC, in Tanzania. Tiffany Hudson, Head of Gender and Social Safeguard Division of the Green Climate Fund, is also here with us. So thank you, Maria and Tiffany, for gracing this occasion. You have 5 minutes each. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi. Okay. Thank you so much for being accorded this space and to be in the midst of all of you. And thank you for the first panel. I hope I'm not using my 5 minutes already, but for the initial discussions, which were very insightful and informative. I would wish to speak about women action towards economic development, and specifically on the agenda that we are discussing today, or rather the topic of our subject today. As Women Action Towards Economic Development, we started the journey for climate financing past 5 years. And I imagine the first day when I heard climate financing, it was a really mumbo jumbo in my head. And I was very curious to understand, what is this climate financing? And this was a global Gaga meeting. I don't remember the year, but some years back, 5 could be. And I was keen to follow up and understand. If I don't understand, what about the communities that I'm working with in Tanzania? So it took me a journey really to go through the technical support from both ends and other colleagues from Gaga, and also to follow up keen within my country to understand what really was transpiring. And with that, enabled us to engage with more than 70 civil society organizations working in grassroots areas. But the fascinating part for us as WATED, and through this journey, and through the studies that we have conducted, it is really a realization, the gap between the policies on climate change generally and climate financing specifically, and also the speaking of this understanding in translating the policies and also the financing to the communities that are facing these climate change impacts, specifically women. And knowing that it was a big mountain to climb, for us, building alliances was really important. So we established gender climate financing monitors. I'm happy one of them, she's here, and the other one just worked out. And for them, I know it is still a very long journey even to follow up the financing in our own context as Tanzania, but also the funding that has been channeled to private sector, which are financing institutions in the country. And now the other gap that we are facing as women rights organizations and environmental groups in the country is the accessibility on the the organizations or the funding which have been channeled to these financing institutions to us as gender monitors in the country to inquire and to understand where the financing really is going, who is receiving these funds. And truly, as we speak about the green climate financing, for instance, and other gender policies, which clearly speaks about the involvement of women, not just them being numbers or being ticked as boxes, but where, if, and how are they being partaking the financing which has been either allocated or being channeled to those banks or other financial institutions. So we had a journey to work, and we were very maybe grateful, or the opportunity was on our side, and the Office of the Vice President in the country, who is the designated authority on green climate financing, gave us a very good access, and we populated a gender strategy to really now bring the civil society into the conversation on gender and climate change, but specifically climate financing. So we are still underway to wait the populated document, which is still with the Office of the Vice President for their final signature, so it can be officially shared by the civil societies working in climate change, specifically gender, but also women rights organizations in the country. But the gap still exists with us accessing the private sector and the private institutions which has been recipients of climate financing in the country. So with that realization, again, with support from Gaga and both ends, we launched this year a Climate Financing Cafe, a space now where we bring different stakeholders for us to speak about those challenges and to find collective solutions. Because we find out if we keep on pushing by ourselves for 3-4 years, we have not reaped any impact or effect to that. So the Climate Financing Cafe brought different stakeholders from academia, private sector, civil society organization, and those who are living these experiences, indigenous women and women human rights defenders, to share their experiences and to find common solutions. And it will be maybe a 2 years activity. We just started this year, and we're hoping to make it really sustainable and to open up to other civil society to be in that space so that we can learn together and find those solutions. And I might say the designated authority as well, the Vice President's office, was present, and for the first time in Tanzania, it was confirmed the gender focal person for climate change has been established within the Office of the Vice President. Again, during the Climate Financing Cafe, she confirmed the challenges that she's facing to coordinate all the ministries together, now let alone to understand I'm hearing myself, let alone to understand the needs of the civil society, because for her, it's a truly new space. So we have another journey to work with her. And the other thing that we realized within as a civil society, and specifically women rights organization and women human rights defenders, indigenous women rights organization, we do not really have a deep understanding on climate financing, but also we need a space for us to continue discuss feminist agenda on climate financing. So we are launching after COP, we'll be launching the Feminist School of Climate Change and Climate Financing in Tanzania, to now have holistic conversations and a mentoring support from other women rights individuals and experts who will be willing to support and take us through the process so that we can be able to engage with policymakers, but also with other financing institutions who maybe we are not going the right way, or maybe we are facing certain challenges which we do not know. So how can we collectively combine our efforts together and move forward? However, it's important for me now to say that despite of these challenges, we are grateful that Tiffany is here with us today, and I'm really interested to learn about green climate financing, and specifically how do the gender policies with the GCF truly can respond to these challenges women are facing, not just women individually, but women collectively? And how do the finance institutions do really adhere to the gender policies as they are stipulated by by the GCF strategy? And the most important also, maybe adding to that one, what could be possible open channel of communication so that we do not have to write letters for 6 years and we are not receiving any response from this recipient of the financing, and yet they do report that women has been participating, women are recipient, and women are part of their processes. But if you ask me, you ask other gender monitors, we have not been part of the process. So who is in the part of these processes? Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to first say congratulations to you, Maria, and to Waited as well for all the great work that you're doing in Tanzania. It's very clear that without the work that you're doing, the kind of progress that's been made would not have been made, right? So that's really, really clear. I want to say congratulations to you, but also to all of the others in this room that are doing the same good work on the ground. I think it's important, and I really thank both ends also for the invitation to come and have this dialogue, because I'm a little tired of making presentations. And I'm really happy to talk with someone and to talk also with you here in the audience and just sort of have more of a conversation about these things. So I haven't prepared a speech or anything, but I do want to come back on a number of the points that I've heard, and I do want to answer your questions as well, Maria. So first of all, just to explain a little bit about how gender is approached through the Green Climate Fund. First of all, in November 2019, our gender policy was updated by our board. We have a board that's half members of developing countries and half members of developed countries. And they adopted quite an ambitious new policy in 2019. And that puts forth a requirement of 100% gender responsiveness for all projects and programs, public sector, private sector, it doesn't matter. And what that means is that since that time till now, every single project that's come through the GCF to the board has been really rigorously checked through due diligence to make sure that it is really gender responsive, not just gender sensitive, right? We're trying to be gender transformative. And one of the ways that we do that is that every single project has to have a gender assessment with baselines, sex disaggregated data, country-specific information, and every single project has to have a gender action plan. It's a table, it has concrete activities listed, and it really, really needs to go above just creating awareness and capacity building, but including women in leadership, training women to, for instance, work in solar farms or whatever it might be, undertake adaptation. Right, so these very concrete, tangible activities are included in gender action plans. And if they're not, then we don't endorse it and it doesn't go forward. So that's the way that we approach it at GCF. It's pretty rigorous and it's pretty stringent. Then part of that is that those gender action plans, and our policy requires this, are undertaken through consultation on the ground, right? It's a requirement. But what we hear is that that's varied in terms of how it's done, right? So our partners, we have over 200 what we call accredited entities. They do this in different ways and to varying extents of depth, I would say. And listening to what Maria was telling me before we came in here, sometimes it's not done well enough, right? And we know that. So we need to work with all of you and with Maria to figure out how to do this better, to hold our partners accountable for really doing meaningful participatory stakeholder engagement on the ground. And that's a priority for us as the GCF, is how to improve that and make sure that that's really happening. And that the right people from civil society are in the room when those stakeholder engagements take place. So that's basically how we're approaching the gender policy since the end of 2019. We also have our own gender action plan at the GCF, which we're finishing this year and going to be reporting on very soon. So please keep an eye out for that early next year. Then how does that translate into implementation and getting women to help us with that monitoring to make sure that those learning loops are also there? First of all, I think it's really important that our partners follow our policy, which also comes back to what Zonia was mentioning, in that women are not just beneficiaries of projects, right? Women are not just victims of climate change and need to be beneficiaries of projects, but they need to be the driving force behind projects as well. We need more women and gender-focused projects, not just projects that benefit women. So that's something that we need to do. Then we need to look at stakeholder engagement, not just as a checkbox, but find out, is it really happening on the ground, right? Who has been in the room? We need to check this from our partners as well, and that's something that we're taking very seriously. Maria, you were talking about connecting at the local level, connecting at the national level, and there seems to be sometimes a gap there. So I was really happy to hear what you were saying about the Nationally Designated Authority, the NDA, and how you've managed to talk with them, and now you have this dialogue also with the focal point, the gender focal point. So that's really amazing. It doesn't happen in all countries. What can we as GCF do to help further those connections at the national level so that civil society and women's groups and indigenous peoples groups can get in touch with their nationally designated authorities and have those conversations? So there are some ways that we can do it, but I'm also very open to hearing other ideas, and please, send them to me if you have them. I'm also going to continue this discussion with Maria after this. We have regional dialogues every year. We just finished one in Africa. We've had one in Latin America and Caribbean this year. Asia Pacific we've held. So every year GCF holds these regional dialogues, and they're meant to be between our NDAs on the ground and also stakeholders. So getting stakeholders to those regional dialogues and identifying who needs to be in the room. Second, connecting women through our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group. So, making sure that they're also listening to the Indigenous women's groups. I think they already are. But, how do we further that? How do we institutionalize that more and make sure that it happens more regularly? Then last, something that's really important is that GCF board this year just adopted our new strategy for the next 4-year period. So this is a big deal. It was a big document. It took a long time to draft, and our board adopted it through consensus, so that was amazing. And it has some really great stuff in it. So it has that we need to do structured forums for stakeholder engagement, more of them. We need to work more with youth. We need to work more with women, Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, and organizations that represent them. So it's really inclusive, I would say. We're already inclusive, but it's just taking it a step further. And another thing that's really important has a strong focus on locally led adaptation. So how do we take all of these priorities that we have for the next 4 years and bring civil society into them through structured forums, but also through other ways? So also very welcome to hearing ideas on that. After here, I'll stick around and hopefully we can have some conversations. But I think it's really positive that the direction that the GCF is moving in is very much in line with what we've been hearing today. And then I'll just end by saying, I think you're probably all aware, but GCF has a very strong new female executive director in Mafalda Duarte. She's a gender champion. We have our senior management is currently around 80% female. Our board has 2 female co-chairs for the first time, starting in January next year. We reached parity, gender parity for the first time in the board at our 36th board meeting this year. So things are definitely improving. Gender balance is having a really good impact on our programming and on our institutional operations as well. But one thing that we need to follow up on is to keep these connections with civil society and have this conversation more regularly and not just at COPs. So I thank you again, and thanks to Don and both ends for the invitation to come and have this dialogue with Maria.
Thank you, Maria and Tiffany. I think it was a very engaging discussion, and you shared a lot about how the GCF financing has been evolving, and Maria has mentioned that their experience on developing the Climate Financing Cafe and bringing different stakeholders, and the importance of having the space to discuss feminist climate financing. We would like to, before we proceed to the third round, we'd like to invite you to get some local snacks. We have berries and Amazon chocolates, I believe, and local berries and biscuits from the Philippines and Brazil. And we also invite you later on to stay up for a bit. We will show a QR code where you can download all the resources and references our panelists have been presenting. So going to the third round, we will have Nida Collado speaking, and also Amy. So finally, our last round will be about gender-just climate solutions and what it means to get core, predictable, multi-year funding for climate finance, and how governments are also working internally in the intersection of gender and climate action in order to get climate finance to gender-just climate solutions. Let me introduce to you Nida Collado and Amy Clement Shaw. Nida Collado is a president of Makatumbalen Community-Based Forest and Coastal Management Association. She champions forest preservation and environmental causes, holding influential roles like also being the newly elected president of the National Community-Based Forest Management Federation of the Philippines. Amy Clement Shaw serves as the head of the Women and Girls Department of UK. I have two questions for Nanay Nida. Nanay Nida, can you share with us the gender-just climate solution you are working on? How are you working in the intersection of climate justice and gender justice? And what does it mean to receive climate finance, for example, from GAGA, core funds or flexible funds? How is it possible? You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good morning. I'm Nida Collado, President of the Makatumbalen Community-Based Forest and Coastal Management, Community-Based Forest Management Program of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines. Most of our members are women advocating for CBFM with complete portfolio for climate change. The island province where I live is now one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world, but this is also heavily threatened by logging, land grabbing, illegal encroachment, mining, tourism, and urbanization. Both men and women in our community experience the harsh effect of the climate change. The changes in weather patterns result in extreme droughts and heavy rainfall, adversely affecting our harvest, particularly our honey supply and crop production. Women's livelihood and their crops are damaged by heavy rains and intense, which affect the food and income they provide for their families. Because of this, women are forced to take loans. Because of the difficulties we have experienced in relation to climate change and threats of our biodiversity, women leaders like me took the initiative to conduct tree planting to expand our forest areas and engage sustainable livelihood as well as strengthening the women's involvement and forest protection activities and taking legal action against the abuse for the forest resources, such as illegal logging, Sweden farming, and other illegal activities. One of our strengths is forest protection initiative. Our members, including the women, have received formal training and education on forest apprehension. We even extend our services to adjacent areas, especially when partner associations need our assistance. Initiatives such as information education campaign, along with inclusive incentives and promising livelihood opportunities for all members, notably alleviate the impact of climate change. Our organization policies or bylaws clearly stipulate the equal roles of women and men in achieving our vision. And we always ensure that the voices of women are heard and recognized. One of our recent undertakings in the establishment of the youth organization is to provide platform for youth empowerment, enabling them to take the lead and partake the forest management and capacitate to ensure that our vision continues for the next generation. As a grassroots community having implemented to no income, securing a budget to fund our initiative has always been one of our biggest challenges. Like many grassroots organizations, all our initiatives are purely voluntary and come with a limited incentives. Consequently, there are times when our human resources are limited, as some of our members also work to feed their families. Moreover, Due to limited available resources, we cannot sustain some of our projects that require maintenance and technological advances. These factors have consequences for our overall operations. Access to secure finances to support or sustain our work and to provide enough incentive for the members is crucial for the success and sustainability of various operations. Just a month ago, the small grant funds we received from NTFP has been instrumental in addressing pressing issues with our community, encompassing environmental abuses and women's concerns. It stands out for the responsiveness, having provided 2 grants, more than less 2 grants for 1 month, offering significant support and funds for our fight for the legal cases we are fighting. They simply required as request letter, taking care of all necessary requirements. So, Ms. Amy, how is Yuki ensuring gender, particularly the voices and needs of grassroots women and girls, are being incorporated into policy design and development? How can existing funding mechanisms and available funding to climate change finance? How can funding for indigenous people and local communities on gender and climate be just?
Thank you so much, Nida. It's fantastic to be here with you and to hear more about your leadership on forest protection in the Philippines. And thank you for your questions. We heard earlier from Zonia about the critical role of women and girls in climate and nature action and how that has so often been overlooked. We've also heard a lot today about how women's participation leads to better, more sustainable results, and there is a lot of evidence to support that view. So we know that at the big picture, we're not going to meet the Sustainable Development Goals or the targets in the Paris Agreement if we don't ensure that everyone in society can shape this future. I think given all that evidence, not only on how climate change affects women, but the role that women are playing and could play in the response, I feel that as a policymaker and a funder, we really have an obligation to try to understand those differing impacts and to think hard about how women and other marginalized groups can be part of decision-making processes and to amplify their voices. I'm thinking particularly of women working at the grassroots and those in parts of the world most affected by climate change. Let me say a little bit about what we're doing from the UK. I mean, we're trying to make sure our climate policies and programs are gender responsive, that they really respond to the needs of women and girls. We put out a strategy on women and girls earlier this year, and it talks about our intention to systematically integrate gender and social inclusion objectives across our climate work, finance programs, and strategy setting. On the finance side specifically, we committed there to increase the proportion of our international climate finance that achieves objectives on gender equality alongside climate. A year ago, we were at 62%, and obviously I want to see that figure go up. We also committed in that strategy to try and get better at gathering and using disaggregated data because often, and I think this is the case across the equalities and inclusion space really, we don't have the information to really expose exactly how climate change is affecting women and other groups differently and how women are able or not able to access our funds. So that's sort of looking at the kind of policy and funding. Second, I wanted to emphasize how we're trying to have a two-way dialogue with women and girls on our approach and to learn from them, both on our women and girls strategy and also our development white paper that we put out a couple of weeks ago. We work closely with local women's rights organizations in the Global South to help us design and develop that. We're also working with them to help implement our women and girls strategy. At the moment, for example, we're looking to set up an external board of activists and experts on gender equality who can challenge us to do better. I mean, the strategy looks out to 2030, so we're just getting that going now. I do realize that it takes time and resource for our partners and women and girl-led organizations to work with governments and donors, but I would say that the impact is very clearly felt. Third, I would emphasize what we're doing to try and raise up the voices of women and girls in climate actions. We do that through our diplomacy, working to try and keep civic space open for women's rights organizations to operate. We try to use our convening power to make sure they're getting a seat at the table. So it's really fantastic to sit alongside you, Nida, given everything you are doing in the Philippines on this agenda. Let me move on to your second question. You were particularly asking about funding mechanisms, how we can do better. And I think we can do a lot better. We know, and everything I've heard today has confirmed my understanding that it is really difficult for women and girl-led community organizations to access climate finance. They're often chronically underfunded, and sometimes the funding systems can be very short-term, very inflexible. So we are trying to adapt in response, and also to use our partnerships to leverage a wider system change. It was great to hear from Tiffany earlier from the Green Climate Fund perspective. We're obviously a donor to the GCF. We recently committed a further $2 billion, and we're ambitious for what we can do through it. Over the next period, we'd really love to see the GCF work to accelerate how support gets to the poorest and most vulnerable communities, and answering to some of these questions around bureaucracy, speed up that access to finance through institutional reform where that's needed. We're very excited that the UK is going to be co-chairing the Green Climate Fund next year, and that we'll be doing that as part of the first all-female co-chair partnership alongside the Dominican Republic. So I think we've laid some groundwork. Let me share a couple of very brief examples on the funding side. We've recently set up a fund whose sole purpose really is to strengthen grassroots women's rights organizations. It's essentially about building feminist movements. My Canadian colleague Andrew Hurst mentioned the Equalities Fund, and I'm really pleased to say that we are delivering that work through a partnership with them. The Equality Fund is a women's fund. They work by crowding in philanthropic funding and returns from gender lens investing to make grants. And through them, what we want to do is provide core multi-year flexible funding for women's rights organizations. So we're trying to get away from a kind of project-based model to something that is longer term, more reliable, based around core funding and as low bureaucracy as possible. So we're very pleased to be working with Canada on that, and I really encourage other donors to explore the Equality Fund and how they could be supported. It's partly about money, but it's also about a platform, and we're working with Women of the South Speak Out. It's a consortium based out of South Africa, and that is seeking to connect women's and girls' organizations and help them participate in national and international meetings. I just briefly want to touch on your last question, Nida, because you asked about how funding for Indigenous peoples and local communities on gender and climate. How can that be just? It's a really vital agenda. We've heard quite a bit about it from really expert and experienced leaders today. I think we, the international community and donors, do need to do more to understand how to make sure those voices are heard. We know that less than 1% of climate finance is reaching Indigenous peoples and local communities. So there's more to do to listen and to learn how to direct funding in the best possible way. We have been trying to make progress on that agenda through our work. An example is a program we have called Early Movers. This is about protecting forests in Latin America. That program's been designed through very close engagement with communities to really talk to Indigenous peoples, smallholder farmers, how we can tailor funding to the context that they are working in. And we've recently launched a new program to gather data on what is happening in those forests and to make that information available widely so it can be used in responses. So in all that, we're trying to make it easier for local communities to participate in forest monitoring and forest carbon standards and to help them access finance. And it's great to hear so much today about how beneficial those kind of approaches can be if they can be scaled up. I will leave it there because I know we...
Thank you.
I feel I've said a lot. Thank you. And thank you, Nida.
Thank you so much, Nai, Nida, and Ami, for a very engaging discussion. We have a few minutes for question and answer. So may I ask the technical team to provide some mic in the floor, and we can accommodate at least 1 or 2 questions. Yes, and then the other one at the back.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sheila. I'm a woman with visual impairment from the Philippines. I'm so delighted to hear these stories about the intersection of gender and climate work and financing gender concerns. I just would like to ask, what have been the involvement of women, girls, and gender diverse people with disabilities in your projects and programs? And has disability been a part of the priorities, looking at also on its intersection with gender and climates? Because we, as many of us know, people with disabilities are one of the most impacted groups in terms of climate change in the world, and sad to say, many of we are still left behind in terms of inclusion. Many times we're seen as part of the vulnerable groups, but not as people who can be part of the solution as well. So yeah, just would like to ask
Thank
those
you.
questions.
Maybe another question before we give the floor to the panelists.
Hello everyone, this is Pragya Serjan from Nepal. I work with Prakriti Resources Center and lead gender theme in my organization. So with the support of Gaga, we had a study on gender in GCF in the South Asian region. And with that study, we found that GCF is very rigorous to select the project in the initial phase, but while implementing, there is a huge gap in the gender equality in terms of gender responsive, because when we talk about, according to our Nepal scenario, there is a, when the project is approved and they have the preparation time period, from the beginning of the project, when the project team is formed, there are like 30 to 35 team members in the project, but there are only 3 female in the team. So the gender equality is just failed there. Then how can we see the other gender action plans to be implemented? So when we talk with the gender focal point from the project team, they said like, we have a gender action plan, we have a gender budget, but when it comes to the implementation, we don't get the budget. So it's my request to the GCF team that you should be very rigorous and accountable, while you should also have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism that tracks how much money is going to the targeted group. The only gender action plan and gender budgeting is not enough from the project perspective. The documentation is not enough. So there should be eyes on the ground, and the involvement of the community people is also essential, because our Nepal project team also said that while implementing, they had not good bonding with the communities. That's why they are in the behind for the implementation. This is because, as she said, one of the panelists also said, we are not in the process. Who are in the process? So when the community groups are not in the process, then they are not able to know about the projects. So the term of FPIC, free FPIC, is also required from the beginning. They should be take consent before developing proposals on behalf of their. So this is my request, and also I would like to share our study with our GCF head, women gender head. So I would like to contact you after this. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So may I give the panelists maybe 1 minute each to respond quickly to the 2 questions, or 2 minutes, at least 2 minutes. Maybe Nida first.
In our community, we have 2 members of disability, but we are treating them as equal to the regular members. And if the work is very hard, we are giving him human consideration, but the benefit sharing in our income, the same, equal to even your disability. We have 2 members in my community.
Thank you, Nida. Maria?
I think you can hear. Oh, yeah. Okay. So thank you for the question. And I must admit, when we started, persons with disabilities were not part of our bigger picture in implementation of the programs. But also, I think because of the whole climate financing was somewhere, somehow, still very complex and complicated to our own understanding. But last year, if not this year, we conducted a study on human rights, climate change, and gender. And among the issues which were clearly coming out strong is groups which have not been clearly participating and engaged, not just as coming up with their solutions, as you say, nothing for us without us, but them being in forefront to give us, or to give the governments and the policymakers their own solutions to the problem that they're facing. So we share that study with the Commission for Human Rights as Tanzania, but also as the Coalition and the Women Action Towards Economic Development with the Feminist School of Climate Change. Among the mentors and participants will be the organization which works with the person with disabilities in the countries. So I might say it's a very new undertake for us, and I'll be also keen to follow up and learn more from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Amy and then Tiffany.
Thanks very much. They were 2 really great questions. On the question on incorporating a disability perspective, I've actually just come from an event that was hosted by UNOPS and an organization called at Scale, about assistive technology, like wheelchairs, eyeglasses, hearing aids, smartphones, and how important that can be in involving people with disabilities or older people in climate action. 20% of women are disabled. That's more women globally than men. The figure for men is 16%. UNICEF and ILO research suggest that difference is down to neglect by health systems, gender-based violence, and poor working conditions. Those are the reasons there are more disabled women in the world than men. And I mean, we're here at COP, and your question was about involvement in climate action. Our disability strategy actually identified climate as an emerging priority alongside more established focuses like social protection, health, and education, because making sure that disaster preparedness and adaptation strategies more generally incorporate a disability-inclusive perspective is really, really key to how we respond to climate change. So thank you for raising that really important intersection. The question from our colleague in Nepal sounded to me, it's really all about how do you make sure the money actually gets to the right people, gets to the women's organizations on the ground. I'm just back from Mexico, and your question actually, for me, recalled experience we had working with organizations on climate projects in Mexico. We had a couple of great projects that were climate projects, land use projects, essentially, with a strong gender component. One was about helping resin producers scale up their production, find markets for resin as an alternative to cutting trees down for livestock. The other was about beekeeping, which in that part of Mexico has always been a women's activity. It's something that could be combined with other responsibilities like caring, but helping those women scale up the beekeeping business so it became a more sustainable and viable source of family income. They were really interesting projects. Our partner basically said, look, we fill in your forms, we do your tick boxing stuff, but really you won't make a difference on any of your gender goals unless you find the organizations to work with who really understand the kind of political economy of that community. You need someone to help you interpret that, to make sure that your intervention doesn't end up reinforcing existing systems of marginalization, and that you actually get the support to the people that can do most with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And a quick one from Tiffany.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. It's not on.
Oh, can you fix the mic, tech team? Go ahead, Tiffany.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Sheila, for that comment. Very, very good comment on people with disabilities. At GCF and the other climate funds, our safeguards focus on the sort of vulnerability aspect of persons with disabilities to make sure that they are not at harm through projects and things. But what's been missing is this more forward-looking, also engaging persons with disabilities and organizations that represent them in project design and taking that kind of lens. So I'm happy to say that in our next 4-year period, we are going to be looking into that more. It's now part of our strategy going forward. And that's very much thanks to a number of our sort of board members who were very vocal about that, including the UK and others. So I'm happy to say that we are going to be focusing on that more in the future, not just from a safeguards perspective, but also looking at project design. And then the comment from our colleague in Nepal was also very, very good. Thank you for that. And I look forward to receiving that study. I'm always happy to receive these external studies because we in the Secretariat don't have the capacity to do all of that amazing work that you're doing out there. We have one gender expert in the team who works on post-approval processes, only just one person. This year she's reviewed 160 annual performance reports specifically on gender. So it's a lot of work for her. She's amazing, she does a great job, but we really do also rely on civil society to hold us accountable and to tell us what's going on the ground. So thank you for sharing that. We do realize that the project design can be very ambitious in gaps, but implementation can be slower. So how to sort of come to terms with that is something that we're also going to be looking at going forward with our partners. And one of the key things here, and I'll just end on this note, is that when an accredited entity gets accredited at GCF, gender is one of the standards. They have to be capacitated and have the relevant expertise on gender to be accredited with the GCF. And if they don't have it, they can apply for readiness to get that. There is a gender window on readiness. And so we do encourage that, and we will be encouraging that even more with our new readiness policy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. A round of applause to our lovely panelists, please. So, thank you. Thank you all. I have learned a lot myself, and some of the takeaways and call to action to everyone from today's session is just, first is remove the barriers. Transparency, accessibility, and gender justice must be the pillars of climate finance. Second, from availability to action, a truly gender-just climate finance system prioritizes the unique insights of grassroots women, girls, youth, and simplifying processes and providing transparent information to mobilize transformative solutions. Third, mechanisms in place which work and which can fund gender-just climate solutions at scale are already available, and we just need to fund them and scale them up. Governments and donors must prioritize gender-just climate finance. Only by direct resourcing grassroots communities can we witness genuine transformative solutions to the climate crisis. And if you want to learn more information about the work of the organizers, of our lovely panelists here, just scan the QR code and we will also share it with you in our email. Once again, thanks so much for all of you here who joined us in the person, and also to our live stream viewers. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with us and contact us. Let's jointly work for gender-just climate finance. Have a good and lovely rest of the afternoon, everyone. Thank you.